My wife cheated on me with her boss, and now she's claiming I stole $250, $0 from her inheritance to cover marital debts, even though I never touched a dime. How do I fight her in court when everything's turned into a brutal battle over our house and a $500, $0 estate? Hello, everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin the video. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons, with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. Honestly, if you told me a year ago that my wife would cheat on me with her boss, Mark, I'd have laughed in your face. But life has a funny way of throwing punches when you least expect them. It all started subtly, with small signs I thought I was imagining. She began working late more often, excuses about big projects or urgent meetings. But I noticed her phone always kept her busy, hiding messages and calls that she'd quickly dismiss when I entered the room. She became more distant, less affectionate, and I caught her lying about her whereabouts one too many times. Then I started noticing things that didn't add up. Her perfume on her clothes when she returned late from work, strange texts she'd delete immediately, and a new, expensive perfume she insisted she bought for herself but refused to show me. I brushed it off at first. Maybe she was just stressed about her job, or maybe I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I felt the weight of suspicion pressing down on me, gnawing at my gut every time I saw her sneaking around or acting secretive. One night, I decided to follow her. I didn't want to confront her blindly, so I parked outside her office building and waited. Hours passed, and I saw her sneaking out with Mark, her boss, a man in his early 50s with a sharp suit and a smug smile. They got into his car, and I saw them kiss before she hurried into his arms. My stomach dropped. That was the moment I knew for sure she'd been lying to me all along. My wife, the woman I loved and trusted, was cheating on me with her boss, and I was just now starting to realize how deep the betrayal ran. I felt a mix of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. I never thought was capable of this kind of deception. She always seemed so put together, so caring, until I caught her in the act. That night I sat in my car, staring at the taillights of Mark's car as she climbed into it, feeling every ounce of my world shift beneath me. I wasn't just betrayed, I was humiliated. How could she do this? And what did it mean for everything we built together? I knew I had to confront her, but I also knew that this was just the beginning of a brutal journey I hadn't prepared for. The next day, I called her at work. When she answered, her voice was cold, almost dismissive. I demanded she come home that evening so we could talk, really talk. When she finally arrived, her face was tight, her eyes cold, and she immediately started spinning her lies. She claimed I was paranoid, that I was imagining things, that her boss was just a mentor, nothing more. She told me I was overreacting, that I was jealous and insecure, but I saw through her lies like glass. I knew the truth, and I was furious. That confrontation marked the start of a new chapter, one filled with pain, betrayal, and the desire for justice. I kept my composure, but inside I was boiling. I realized that I couldn't just sweep this under the rug or pretend it didn't happen. She had crossed a line, and now I needed to decide what to do about it. I didn't want to lose everything: our house, our shared money, the life we'd built. But I also couldn't let her get away with lying and cheating, not without consequences. In the days that followed, I started digging into her finances, her phone, her emails. I needed to understand the full extent of her deception. That's when I uncovered something even more shocking: was claiming I stole $250, $0 from her inheritance, trying to cover marital debts. She insisted I owed her. That was a blatant lie. I never touched a dime of her inheritance, and I knew she was trying to manipulate the situation to turn everyone against me. She was trying to paint me as the villain, while she was the one who'd been unfaithful and dishonest from the start. I felt betrayed all over again, but this time by the woman I'd loved and trusted. I realized I had to fight back, not just for my dignity, but to protect what was rightfully mine. The house, the estate, everything she claimed I stole, none of it was true. I knew I had to gather evidence, prepare for a legal battle, and stand my ground. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. I was ready to fight for my life, my reputation, and whatever was left of the marriage that had already been shattered beyond repair. The more I dug into her financials, the clearer it became that was playing a very dangerous game. She was claiming I had stolen $250, $0 from her inheritance to cover supposed marital debts. But I knew better. I never touched that money. It was her family's estate, her inheritance, and I had always been upfront about not having a dime of it. Yet she spun this story like it was some kind of divine truth, trying to turn everyone against me, her family, friends, even the lawyer I hired. I started collecting proof, bank statements, emails, text messages. I wanted to see if she'd slipped up somewhere, and I found some things that made my blood boil. She'd been funneling money into her personal accounts, claiming it was for expenses, but I knew she'd been using it to hide her affair. I found receipts for hotel stays, dinners with Mark, and even a few luxury gifts she insisted she bought for herself. Meanwhile, she was telling everyone I was a thief, a liar, a man who was secretly stealing from her inheritance to fund some wild spending spree. I had to be careful, was manipulative. She'd lie and twist facts faster than I could keep up. She'd call me paranoid, accuse me of snooping, and pretend she was the victim. Her voice was sharp, bitchy even, whenever I confronted her about the money or her affair. She insisted that I was trying to ruin her, that I was jealous of her success, and that I was just a manipulative, jealous husband who couldn't handle her moving on with her life. That was her typical response: blame me, gaslight me, and deny everything. But I had enough evidence to see through her lies. The thing is, had always been a bitchy, stubborn woman, but her attitude now was downright venomous. She'd scream at me, call me a loser, and accuse me of trying to steal her inheritance as if I was some greedy monster. She even claimed I'd been secretly planning to run off with her family's estate, that I was after her money all along. The audacity. I was just trying to prove I wasn't the villain she made me out to be. I knew that if I didn't act fast, she'd keep spinning her web of lies and accusations, dragging me further into a pit I couldn't escape. One night, I caught her trying to delete some emails from her phone. I managed to grab her device before she could erase everything. That's when I found the real proof: messages between her and Mark, explicit conversations about their secret meetings, and plans for what they called the next step. I read how they planned to keep their affair hidden, how Mark was telling her she deserved more than just a boring marriage, and how was convinced I was too stupid or blind to notice. That was the moment I knew I had to act. I couldn't just sit back and let her destroy me with her lies. I had to prepare for the inevitable legal battle, and I knew I'd need hard evidence to counter her claims. I started compiling everything: screenshots, bank statements, witness statements from friends who'd seen her acting suspiciously. I also contacted a private investigator to corroborate some of my suspicions. The pieces were falling into place, and I could see that was more desperate than ever to cling to her lies and her affair. Meanwhile, her attitude was getting worse. She'd scream at me in public, call me an insecure idiot, and accuse me of being possessive for just asking her questions about her whereabouts. Her words stung, but I kept my cool. I knew that if I lost my temper, she'd use it against me in court. I was trying to stay focused, but honestly, every time I saw her bitchy smirk or heard her dismissive tone, it made me want to explode. She was so good at spinning her lies, convincing everyone she was the victim while I was the villain. And then came the bombshell. I found out she'd been claiming I stole money from her inheritance not just to cover marital debts, but to hide her affair with Mark. She was trying to frame me as a thief, as someone who'd been secretly draining her family's estate for years. I knew that was a lie. I'd never touched a penny of her inheritance, and I had the proof. But her accusations were dangerous because they could ruin me legally and socially. I had to act fast, get ahead of her lies, and prepare my defense. It was clear she was desperate, and her desperation was turning her into a manipulative, vindictive bitch. She'd scream, cry, and lie her way out of every situation, but I refused to be her pawn. I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine, my reputation, my integrity, and my dignity. I knew this was going to get messy, but I was tired of her games. I wanted the truth out in the open, and I was determined to see her pay for what she'd done. I wasn't just after revenge. I wanted justice. After gathering what felt like a mountain of evidence, I knew I had to be strategic about my next move. Accusations about me stealing her inheritance weren't just lies. They were a calculated attempt to weaken my position, to make me look like the bad guy in front of the court and her family. I had to counter her narrative with facts, with proof that I'd never touched that money, and that her claims were nothing but a desperate smear campaign. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in family law and estate disputes. From the moment I explained everything, he told me I had a strong case, if I could keep my evidence organized and present it clearly. I hired a private investigator to verify her secret meetings with Mark, and I made sure I had detailed records of her financial transactions that didn't match her story. I also contacted a forensic accountant to audit her accounts, just to be sure there were no hidden transfers or suspicious activity on my end. I wanted her to see that I was serious about fighting back. Meanwhile, his attitude kept deteriorating. She became more aggressive, more bitchy, and more dismissive of my concerns. She'd lash out at me during arguments, calling me a jealous, insecure loser, and accusing me of trying to ruin her reputation. She even started spreading rumors at her workplace that I was mentally unstable or that I'd been secretly stealing money for years. Her lies became more elaborate and more vicious. It was like she was trying to burn everything down: our marriage, my reputation, my ability to defend myself. One afternoon, I caught her trying to transfer more money out of her account. I'd set up a monitoring alert, and sure enough, there was a suspicious transfer to an offshore account. I immediately called my lawyer, who advised me to freeze her accounts and notify the bank. I didn't want her to get away with hiding any more funds. That night, I sat in our living room, feeling a strange mixture of anger and relief. I was finally taking control of the situation, fighting back against her manipulations. But I also felt exhausted, like I'd been running a marathon and still had miles to go. Things escalated when suddenly filed a restraining order against me, claiming I'd been abusive and threatening her. I was stunned. I hadn't raised my voice at her in months, and I never laid a finger on her. But her accusations were a new tactic, trying to paint me as the villain in this story, even though I had all the evidence to prove her lies. The court date was set, and I had to prepare my defense, gather witnesses, and make sure I had everything ready. I knew this was about more than just money. It was about saving what little dignity I had left. In the meantime, his bitchy side came out even more. She'd call me names, accuse me of being crazy, and insist I was out to ruin her career and her reputation. She'd say I was jealous of her success, that I was just a scorned husband trying to lash out because I couldn't handle her moving on without me. I didn't bother arguing anymore. I just kept my head down, focused on the facts, and prepared myself for the worst. I knew she'd do whatever it took to win, even if it meant lying, cheating, or throwing everything into chaos. Then, unexpectedly, her boss Mark started acting nervous. I caught wind that he was under investigation for some financial misconduct at his company, and I couldn't help but think it was connected to lies. I had no proof yet, but I sensed that their affair was more complicated than just a fling. It was part of a larger web of deception, and I was determined to untangle it. I contacted my lawyer again, told him everything I'd learned, and asked him to subpoena Mark's financial records. I wanted to see if there was any link between the affair and her accusations about the inheritance. It was like everything was spiraling out of control, but I refused to back down. I knew was counting on her charm, her bitchy attitude, and her lies to win this fight. But I had something she didn't: the truth and the evidence to back it up. I was tired of being the victim, tired of her manipulations, and tired of feeling like I was losing everything. If this court battle was going to be brutal, then so be it. I was ready to fight with everything I had, even if it meant risking my sanity, my reputation, and my peace of mind. Because at the end of the day, I knew I wasn't the one who betrayed the vows we once shared. She was, and I was determined to make her see that, no matter what it took. The court date finally arrived, and I felt like I was walking into a battlefield. Showed up with her usual bitchy smirk, dressed to look like the innocent victim, while I tried to keep my composure. She had her lawyer with her, a slick guy who seemed more interested in turning the court into a circus than actually listening to the facts. I had my evidence ready: bank statements, emails, texts, witness statements, and my lawyer had everything organized. I knew this was my shot to finally expose her lies and prove that her accusations about me stealing her inheritance were just that, lies. When the hearing started, S lawyer began spinning her version of events, claiming I'd been secretly siphoning off her inheritance for years, that I was a jealous, manipulative husband who'd only stay married to her for the money. Herself sat there, acting fragile but with that bitchy edge in her eyes, trying to look innocent. She told the court I'd been abusive, that I'd threatened her, and that I'd been planning to run off with her estate. It was all so absurd I almost laughed. But I kept my cool, presenting my evidence piece by piece, showing the court that she'd been lying from the start. I pointed out the bank statements showing I never transferred a single penny from her inheritance. I had nothing to hide. Then I presented the email chains and texts between her and Mark, which proved beyond a doubt that they'd been having an affair, something she'd repeatedly. I called witnesses, mutual friends who'd seen her acting suspiciously, and a private investigator who confirmed Mark's financial misconduct and his connection to lies. It was overwhelming for her, I could tell. Her face kept twitching, trying to maintain that innocent victim persona, but her eyes flickered with guilt every time I laid out the facts. The judge listened carefully, asking pointed questions about the financial discrepancies, her claims of theft, and her accusations of abuse. I could see her trying to spin her story, but my evidence was too strong. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was finally the moment I could turn the tide. I was so focused on the proceedings, I almost forgot how much I'd been hurt by her betrayal. But every time I saw her bitchy smirk or heard her lie, I remembered why I was there. Because I deserved justice, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way out of this. Halfway through, S lawyer tried to attack my credibility, claiming I'd been jealous and possessive, trying to paint me as the villain. I shot back, laying out every fact I had: my clean record, my efforts to find the truth, her secret meetings, and her financial lies. I saw her falter for a moment, her bitchy mask slipping. That was when I realized she was losing control. Her lies were unraveling faster than she could spin them. The courtroom was quiet, tense, almost like everyone was waiting for the truth to come out. When the judge finally rendered a decision, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She ruled in my favor, dismissing claims that I'd stolen her inheritance. The judge ordered her to return the money she'd illegally transferred and to stop spreading false accusations. It was a victory, but it felt hollow, like I'd only just begun to fight. Was furious. She stormed out, bitching about how the system was against her, how I'd ruined everything, but I didn't care. I had won the battle, and I knew this wasn't the end. That evening, I sat alone in our house, feeling drained but finally free from her manipulations. The court had exposed her lies, and I had the proof to clear my name. But I also knew that the emotional damage was deep. I'd been betrayed in the worst way, and part of me wondered if I'd ever fully recover from the pain. Still, I felt a strange sense of relief, like I could finally breathe again, like the weight of her lies had been lifted. In the days that followed, I worked on rebuilding my life. I contacted a financial advisor to secure what was left of the estate, made plans to sell the house if necessary, and started therapy to process everything I'd been through. This bitchy attitude persisted, but I refused to let her control my peace of mind. I kept reminding myself that I'd done everything I could to fight for the truth, and that no matter what she said or did, I was the one who had stayed honest, who had fought for justice. Looking back, I realize how much this ordeal has changed me. I've learned that betrayal comes in many forms, and sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you the most. But I also learned that truth has a way of coming out, no matter how much someone tries to hide it. And that, in the end, integrity and perseverance matter more than any amount of money or superficial charm. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I'll never let anyone manipulate or lie to me like that again. After the court victory, I thought things might finally settle down. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but relieved that I had cleared my name and exposed lies. The judge's ruling was a small victory, but I knew the real battle was far from over. Didn't take the loss lightly. Her bitchy attitude only intensified, and she started lashing out at everyone around her, especially me. She was furious, bitter, and desperate to regain control of the narrative, even if it meant more lies and manipulation. Her bitchy side became even more evident in how she handled the aftermath. She would call me names when she thought I wasn't listening, accuse me of being a jealous, insecure loser, and insist I'd been plotting to steal her inheritance all along. She'd say I was just a manipulative man trying to ruin her reputation. The truth was, I'd spent months fighting for my reputation, for my sanity, and for the little dignity I had left. But she kept pushing, trying to turn everyone against me, claiming I was the villain while she played the victim. One day, decided to take it a step further. She filed for full custody of our house, claiming I was unfit to stay there because I was mentally unstable after everything that happened. I was stunned. I never raised my voice at her, never laid a finger on her, but suddenly I was being painted as the dangerous one. She even went as far as claiming I'd been abusing her during our marriage, another blatant lie. I knew she'd do anything to keep the house, the estate, and what little control she still had over her life. I had no choice but to fight back again. I gathered witnesses, including friends who'd seen her acting irrationally, and I hired a therapist to testify about my mental health. I also had to prove that I was a responsible, stable adult who had done nothing to deserve her accusations. Meanwhile, this bitchy attitude kept escalating. She'd call me names in front of our friends, accuse me of being a terrible husband, and blame me for everything that went wrong. Her words stung, but I refused to let her manipulate me anymore. Her lawyer tried to use her accusations of abuse as leverage, claiming I was dangerous and unfit to be around the house. But I had months of evidence showing I'd been nothing but respectful and responsible. I was prepared for this, and I knew that her lies would crumble under the weight of the truth. I also made sure to document her behavior, texts, emails, witness statements, that proved she was the one acting irrationally, not me. Throughout this whole process, bitchy attitude remained relentless. She'd scream at me in public, call me a worthless, jealous idiot, and insist she was the real victim here. She'd cry, throw tantrums, and do everything she could to turn the court against me. But I stayed calm, focused on the facts, and kept my dignity intact. I knew that if I lost my temper or let her get to me, she'd win, and I refused to let her do that. I knew that her obsession with control was rooted in her own insecurities and her affair with Mark. That bastard was still lurking in the background, and I kept gathering evidence that connected him to her financial manipulations and her lies. I found more emails between them, discussing, covering their tracks, and I handed everything over to my lawyer. I wanted the court to see how deep her betrayal went, not just with me, but with her own integrity. Eventually, the court hearings for the house and estate went in my favor. I was awarded primary custody of the house and was ordered to pay back the funds she illegally transferred. But the emotional scars ran deep. I'd been betrayed by the woman I loved, and I knew I'd have to live with that pain for a long time. Still, I felt a strange sense of closure. For the first time in months, I could breathe a little easier, knowing I'd fought for the truth and come out on top. The aftermath was a mix of relief and reflection. I started counseling to deal with the emotional fallout and began rebuilding my life from scratch. I sold the house, moved into a small apartment, and focused on my own healing. On the other hand, continued her bitchy, manipulative ways, but I no longer cared. I had won the legal battles, and I'd exposed her for who she really was, an unfaithful, manipulative woman willing to lie, cheat, and destroy everything for her own gain. Looking back, I realize how much I've grown through this ordeal. I learned that sometimes The people closest to you are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. But I also learned that the truth has a way of coming out, even if it takes months, years, or a court battle to do so. I wish I could say I'm completely healed, but I know I'll carry the scars of this experience forever. What I do know is this: never let anyone manipulate or lie to you, and always fight for what's right, no matter how brutal the fight gets. Because in the end, integrity and honesty are the only things that truly matter. After everything, I've come to realize how much betrayal can shatter your world, but also how resilience can rebuild what's broken if you're willing to fight for it. The court's final ruling was the victory I desperately needed, but even now, months later, I still feel the sting of her bitchy lies and manipulations. His attitude never changed much. She's still bitter, still trying to save face, still insisting she's the victim. But I've learned to see her for what she truly is: a woman driven by insecurity, greed, and a desperate need to control everything, including the truth. Living through this has been a brutal lesson in trust and deception. I used to believe love meant never having to fight for your dignity, but now I know better. Love is about honesty, respect, and standing up for yourself when those things are threatened. I've learned that some people, women like, will do anything to preserve their image, even if it means destroying everything in their path. And that's a hard truth to swallow. Through the chaos, I also discovered my own strength. I found that I could face lies, manipulation, and betrayal without losing myself. I learned to stand firm, gather evidence, fight legally, and keep my integrity intact. I also learned that revenge isn't about hurting her back, it's about making sure she can't hurt you anymore. And I think I've achieved that. The court's decision was my revenge, in a way, a clear statement that her lies and manipulations would not prevail. Now I focus on healing. I've started therapy, reconnected with old friends, and begun to rebuild my life, slowly, carefully. I know I'll never forget what happened, but I refuse to let it define me. I've learned that the true measure of a person is how they respond to betrayal, how they pick themselves up after being knocked down. I've come out of this stronger, more cautious, more aware of the people I let into my life. Looking back, I also realized that I was blind for a long time. I ignored the signs, convinced myself everything was fine because I didn't want to face the truth. But sometimes, you have to face the darkness head-on to see the light. And I'm grateful I finally did. I'm grateful I fought for my reputation, for my dignity, and for the truth. Because in the end, that's all that really matters: being honest with yourself and refusing to let anyone manipulate or lie to you. So here's my final piece of advice: trust your instincts. When something feels off, don't ignore it. Confront it. Gather your evidence, stand your ground, and don't be afraid to fight for what's right. Because even in the darkest moments, there's a spark of hope. Hope that honesty and perseverance will see you through. And that, no matter how bitchy or manipulative someone becomes, the truth will always come out in the end.